Alright, thank you for joining. I really appreciate it. It's the 30th April. It's 9:24 a.m. Pacific time. Schools and Americans step up spending as brace for tariff impact. Washington. A closely watched inflation gauge cooled last month in a sign that prices were steadily easing before most of President Donald Trump's tariffs were implemented. At the same time, consumers accelerate their spending, particularly on cars, likely in an effort to get ahead of duties. Wednesday's report from the Commerce Department showed that consumer prices rose just 2.3% in March from a year earlier, down from 2.7% in February. Excluding the volatile food and energy categories, core prices rose 2.6% compared with a year ago, below February's 3%. Economists track core prices because they typically provide a better read on where inflation is. The slow inflation could be a temporary respite until the widespread duties imposed by Trump to push up price in many categories. Most economists expect inflation to start up in the coming months. Core inflation will inevitably rebound sharply in the coming months. Harry, assistant economist at Capital Economics, said in an email, "Good prices will rise more strongly." She expects core inflation will near 4% by later this year. Wednesday's report also showed that consumer spending increased 0.7% from February to March, a healthy gain. Much of the increase appears to be driven by efforts to get ahead of duties, such as Trump's 25% duty on imported cars, which took effect April 3rd. On autos surged 8% in March. Still, that means those are likely to fade in the coming months because those assets have already been secured. But spending on restaurants and hotels also jumped after falling in February, a sign Americans are still willing to splurge a little on travel and dining out. The spending increase is noteworthy because consumer confidence surveys have launched for months, suggesting Americans have been increasingly worried about the economy. Yet, so far, that hasn't translated into a noticeable slowdown in spending. Earlier Wednesday, the government reported that consumer spending slowed in the first 3 months of the year, compared with last year's final quarter. Bad weather depressed shopping, and Americans took a breather after healthy spending over the winter holidays. The nation's economy actually shrank 0.3% in the January-March quarter as imports surged as companies sought to get ahead of Trump's tariffs. Trump benefited in last year's election from broad acceptance among voters about the steep rise in prices that began in 2021, and that on average pushed prices up about 25% by the middle of last year. Grocery costs shot up nearly 30%. Candidate he would immediately lower prices if elected. Yet the president has slapped 25% duties on steel and aluminum, as well as cars, and a 10% tariff on nearly all other imports. In China, the United States' third largest trading partner now faces a 145% duty on its exports. The inflation fighters at the Federal Reserve target a 2% inflation rate at pay close attention to Wednesday's inflation gauge, known as the Personal Consumption Expenditures Price Index. The better-known Consumer Price Index was released earlier this month and also showed a steady decline. Inflation figures were revised higher for January and February, leaving prices increases in the first quarter higher than previously estimated. the higher figures will likely leave. Fed officials worry of cutting rates soon, even before taking tariffs into account. Trump has pushed the Fed to cut its key short-term interest rate because inflation has cooled, but Fed Chairman has underscored that the central bank is likely to remain on the sidelines as officials gauge how tariffs will impact the economy. The Fed isn't expected to lower its rate at its policy meeting next week. After highs, inflation is now falling across the eurozone. But why is this happening so quickly? Some of the key reasons behind the inflation drop for central banks' interest rate hikes to shifting supply chain dynamics and energy prices stabilizing. Does this mean that inflation crisis is over, or could prices surge again unexpectedly? We explore what's next for the economy, wages, and consumer prices, whether we should be preparing for another surprise. Again, really appreciate the button. Subscribe to the channel. Comment down below. Let me know what you think. And of course, follow me on Instagram, Studio11. Follow me on X, the Studio 2020. I like to say Twitter. Follow me on Twitter. And of course, see you on the next video.